I suppose there's never a good way to begin something, so sometimes you just gotta start regardless of, I don't know, there's a part of me that just wants to wait till I'm in that ideal state of what I perceive to be presence. But anyway, hello. Alright. Hello, my name is Colbin Wadman, and today I will be discussing how I auto-generated a bilingual dictionary and phrasebook dataset. Let's see. So the purpose of such, in my case, was for like language learning use cases, but I like to think it has pretty widespread applicability, especially like how I went about solving it. Now, keep in mind, I've definitely learned a lot, and I've been working on what I consider to be like the next evolution of dataset generation. Especially because what I will be presenting will be very hand-tuned, handwritten code for this specific use case, which is like a bilingual dictionary and phrasebook app. And yeah, I've definitely learned quite a few things. And yes, there are going to be moments when I'm going over my implementation that if you were to hire me to do something in more professional capacity, I would definitely reconsider doing things. Also, about me, I'm the kind of person, I'm a mile wide and an inch deep in some ways. But in general, I like to think that I work on tools. Worked on a whole multitude of tools. I can do a lot of other things on the side, but yes, tools is really my passion point. And all right, why is this important? Well, lots of pretty common use case in software where you need like data sets of various types and the kind of data sets that aren't generally user or crowdsourced content, although that can be an option. Like in my case, there are crowdsourced alternatives as well as like commercial options, such as from like big name publishers, but they don't necessarily want to work with you. And furthermore, I honestly think what I have vastly superior compared to like Merriam-Webster. My version, way better. Doesn't come close. Even if their data set is better in some ways, it may be better now, but mine is the potential there vastly superior. And also, I made a lot of trade-offs for cost. So if something is, there are a lot of things that could be improved, but it was usually with regard to cost because I was iterating in such a manner that I could make a change and validate whole swaths of data that need to be regenerated. So yeah, the data set itself and what I will be presenting, that itself isn't particularly interesting. With regard to, there's only like 1,000 or so dictionary entries, and depending on what you're counting, and there's only like 1,000 or so phrasebook entries. Actually, there are like, if you were to count like unique definitions, there are like thousands. But as far as like unique words themselves, just because there's a concept in linguistics called homographs, which are words that are spelled the same but have completely different meanings. So you have to accommodate that somehow. I did do a bit of research while working on this project. But anyway, I hope to kind of steer clear of maybe linguistic specific details and just focus on how this can be applicable to the world of software and software developers. And hopefully if you needed... And yes, hopefully if you yourself are in a setting where you're considering such work, maybe pay to bring me on board. So yeah, maybe in the next video I'll be holding up a sign. Hang on. All right, I should be playing. Sorry about that. But yeah, maybe in the next video I'll be holding up a sign, will program for food or whatever. But anyway, I digress. Why is this important? Lots of software are themselves wrappers around particular data sets, or they greatly enhance the user experience via like features that are themselves dependent on particular data sets. The kind of data sets that you would typically employ writers or a team of writers to like manually compile. In the context of dictionaries, they're called lexicographers, like people who are employed to compile dictionary data sets. And yes, while that may be great in some ways, and there are some aspects of what I'm doing that is very difficult to get right in terms, but it's relatively easy for a human, such as categorization. In general, you want things to be, there's definitely this mean where you don't necessarily want one category per entry, obviously. But yeah, LLMs, they can be very specific if you ask it to categorize something. and they don't necessarily have wider context of like all other entries. So because you want categorization with regard to all other entries in a particular data set, and you want things to be clustered. What's the term? Like clustered, dense, and not too sparse. I don't know. There's definitely this mean of maybe as you might call like specificity or like generality. And yeah, there are some things that are very difficult. But yes, it is pretty common in software. Now, I will be presenting this in the context of like language learning settings. I refer to it as a bilingual dictionary and phrasebook dataset. But I like to think that, yeah, as I mentioned, it's pretty widespread applicability, and it's definitely interesting on its own. I used to consider myself an amateur compiler engineer. I never did so in a professional capacity. It was just like toy compiler projects where I'd start with like a simply typed like lambda calculus like language, including maybe like a front end like syntax format that would be parsed into an internal like data model called the abstract syntax tree, essentially a data model representation of parse source code, abbreviated AST for short. And I do various like transformation analyses, transformations, and then you get to code gen or like the runtime interpreter or whatever that backend may be for like, and then eventually like execution at runtime. But yeah, eventually morphed into an Elm-like programming language. I definitely learned a lot. I was very young at the time. But yeah, and I kind of cheated too because I used a reference book called Write You at Haskell, huge, which was very much invaluable when it came to type inference and type checking, especially with regard to type inference itself. Looking back, there are some things that, especially when you get to like some ideas in like maybe formal logic, there's a lot of ideas like that are kind of obvious when it actually like clicks, but like getting there, it might not be so obvious. I don't know, it's hard to explain. But yeah, in some ways, I like to think I definitely pulled from that background, which is kind of nice because I wasted too much of my time in that regard when I was younger. I don't know why I got so interested. I was just thinking in terms of like trees and transformation trees, especially in these like batch-like processing pipelines that I very much enjoyed. So yeah, and in some ways I kind of pulled from that background, and I like to think what I have can be very useful for industry. I don't know how many people have really gone down this avenue when it comes to like data set generation via these like emerging like large language model technologies. And what I will be presenting, it's really hard to know, like there's tons of decisions I had to make throughout the entire pipeline. What I refer to as just the like compiler generated pipeline. Just pulling on that like compiler background, I refer to as like the compiler pipeline or particular compilers where this one compiler might be downstream of another compiler. It's all compilers, but ultimately I'm using LLMs for like populating data, and that's going to be handled. And in terms of like the constituent like components in this pipeline. And also I have this general philosophy that in general you cannot just with LLMs you can't just produce something from nothing and expect ideal results. I do like to consider this to be publication quality data set, but I've definitely learned a lot in that regard. And also there's a lot I could include. Now also as I mentioned, the data set itself, it could range from like 10 entries to millions of entries. That's what I think is particularly interesting about how I did this. And I did it all like offline in like batch mode as part of like that I might like. And the idea is I would do it during development for like a project, compile that down to an SQLite database file, and then from there I can easily like bundle that in with the app that I may like upload to the app store or whatever, or like send it to the client in such a way that everything is available locally and there are really no network dependencies, what I like to think is particularly ideal. Just because, for instance, let's say you need like a very like publication quality dictionary data set. You do have some options, which is either employ a team of writers and compile it yourself, or partner with like a big name publisher, and they do have API access to their data set, but they don't necessarily want to work with anyone, especially maybe probably someone like you, unless you're associated with like Apple or Microsoft. I can imagine there are a lot of rules. I think there's a rule that like you can't catch the data from like API invocations over the network. So yeah, just on its own, you need network access to interact with these services. I can imagine a big concern for them is they don't want people to just create an account, pay like $100 and then scrape the entire data set, and then that would be that. Because I can imagine it's all that much in like information terms. But not only that, let's say you did have like money, like everything was at your disposal, and you had options. Is like Merriam-Webster? Do they have API access, or was it like Cambridge? I remember looking at one in particular. I don't remember, but at any rate, where was I? Yeah, even then, is that data set really suited to your app? Because there are lots of use cases where you need particular data sets, and sometimes you might want the particular aspects of the data to be very application specific in a way that like these more general purpose publishers, at least I suppose the application for them was like printing dictionary books. And yeah, if I were to look at one, they generally only give you the definition and context for what's referred to as the base form of the word, or the lemma form. It's like the base form minus any, I think I'd say like inflections, such as in English there's plurality, like you have an object that could be like an item. You have many such objects that could be items. Like the S at the end for like plurality, or as you might say, singularity. I think I want to say this is way more common in other languages like Spanish, but I'm not a particular expert. And in general, I hope to like steer clear of certain terminology. Of like, I did do a little bit of research beforehand, but yeah, one such terminology are anyway. I'll get to that in context. So how shall I proceed? I did do a brief, as you might say, like test run last night. Uploaded that to YouTube, watched it, and I remember there were some things that I remember thinking that I should change, but it's not come to mind. And yeah, what you see is very much unscripted, but we may as well just jump straight to the results and keep it interesting. All right, so let's load up my iPad, my phone, switch to that scene, here and here. Let's go to a good examples, animals. Now there's a lot in the data set that might not necessarily be displayed on the front end. Just keep in mind. And in some ways it's a little too smart, because I was like, why isn't it showing the base form of the word? But then maybe it already is in the lemma form. And I think the UI is a little too smart, where if it's not technically necessary, I'll exclude it. But yeah, I can change it. And also this list itself should be alphabetically sorted. The UI was in some ways a bit of an afterthought, especially the flashcard component. Some things I do enjoy design to some extent. So let's click on something. Yeah, this popover. The popover itself, amazing. But the actual like UI UX of like terrible, especially with the data at hand. I do like Apple's the dictionary utility bundle. Is that still bundled with? I can't remember the last time I even clicked on it, honestly. But yeah, this is also a native app. Swift UI, the text views themselves, I think it's just like UI text view or whatever. I'd have to go over the particular implementation. I wrote this some time ago. In general, I should have began these video series a long time ago when the details were still fresh in my mind, especially with regard to like very complicated details. But yeah, you got to start somewhere, and the time is now in this regard. It might appear somewhat yellow in your feed, but it should be more of like a light orange. These are entries. These are words that don't have a corresponding entry in the dictionary, such as maybe that was in the like input lexicon or vocabulary set or whatever. Essentially like a word list that's then fed through the dictionary compiler. But yeah, if something fails at some point, it may retry, but yeah, at a certain point, it'll just skip it. And there's, as far as even the data set, there are like varying options from less ideal to more ideal. And at the UI side, I try to display whatever is like the more ideal datum or whatever for a particular context. But if that's not available, then I'll do fallbacks to something else in the data set that could still represent it. And if not, then I won't display appropriately. But yeah, okay. I don't want to abejas, plural noun, base form. Abejas equals to abeja. And if we were to go over to here, pronunciation notes, the J is pronounced like the H in hat, ha, abeja. Also, that box, there's the this is for like pronunciation notes. Obviously, like if I were to be very fancy, it would be like audio transcriptions. I did consider that, never got around to it. I was mostly focused on text content. But yeah, I still like to see like phonetic transcriptions where possible. Like when I was reading Dune, I had to look up pronunciation guides, and you could in YouTube, but it's nice to just be able to slow down and look at like things split up by like syllables, or maybe a more broken down phonetic transcription, such as in this context. There's the IPA transcription. I don't consider that particularly user friendly or expect people to understand that. Unlike if you were to open up the dictionary, it's like all IPA. And not only that, things can vary by region. I don't know like what they, and usually there's only like one transcription per word, so it's like what one did they go with, and especially if it varies by region. But anyway, I digress. And then below that is what I refer to as the simplified phonetic transcription. That should be approachable for like a layman, like English speaking audience. Be, ha. Something like that. And then there's one entry, noun, feminine, abeha, the definition. Now, I would like to maybe switch to the desktop. So I could, I think there's an extension where I can like show where the device input is coming from on the screen, such as from my Apple Pencil. But I don't know. It's what I have. Anyway, going back. Behaz. Maybe let's just bring up. Can I bring up the entry for the plural version? Yeah, where's the? There it is. Only a partial definition was found, the Lima form. Yeah, so I could be more comprehensive, but it's partly just to, like, I suppose, save costs. But anyway, the app itself, it may not be the most fancy, but as I mentioned, the emphasis of this video isn't the UI, but the actual dataset, and not necessarily the dataset itself. It's very sparse. It's really optimized for a cost, but you could go from like 10 entries to a million entries in a very scalable, automated, streamlined manner. And yeah, even that compared to like hiring a team of writers, and even if like such was at your disposal, you may also, as a developer, want to iterate on the particular aspects of your data, and you could maybe tell your team of writers to, oh yeah, we're going to start fresh, recompile this entire data set, but in like this way instead of that way. And yeah, you got to wait for them to complete before you could include it in your app and actually get a feel for it. Here, I honestly think it's the best of all possible options, all possible worlds. Yeah, so diving into I may as well just proceed straight to the dataset. There's not that much to see. If we were to go over to here, the phrasebook is even simpler. Let's go to greetings and farewells. Miscellaneous stuff. There's like some filtering options because it can get quite long just to be convenient, especially if you're focused on like pronunciations of certain like letters or whatnot, such as this, even though there's no entries in this set. Flashcards, very much an afterthought. I was like, it has to have flashcards for it, but yeah, could definitely be redone. But yeah, I was mostly focused on the display of static content. Now let's conclude that. I think we got the point. And let's dive into, yes, as the emphasis of this video will be the dataset. How it came about. Okay, so I refer to as the compiler crates. But for the purpose of this demonstration, oh wait, I need to make sure the desktop scene is visible. Yes, there we go. I wonder if that's too big. I don't know. Yeah, so it will be compiler crates demo. I need to make sure upper and generally left side of the screen is safe. Just because we'll be deleting content. Now my fans are spiking up. Hope that isn't present. I should make a note to post-process the audio stream and the resulting container after I finish this recording. Clean it up. Or if I get lazy, I won't. But yeah, I don't know. I was listening to the thing I uploaded last night, even from YouTube, and it wasn't that bad. But yeah, I thought let's do a small dry run, I suppose. Or not necessarily dry run, but like let's just invoke it before we start changing things. Cargo run bin. Now I mentioned I'll dive into like the particular aspects of this in a bit, but one thing. Yeah. So I'm using color coding. It's kind of great because it could distinguish it from like LLM output for debugging. And in some cases, I'll use like a full conversation history and feed that back in, especially in case of errors. But is this like an ideal theme? I'm supposed to do it now. Anyway, let's just run it. I think it should just run through. Then I can delete something. As I mentioned, it kind of works like a compiler. You can think of something akin to like makefile, where if the target files exist, then it'll just read from that, proceed to the next step. So I can delete something at any stage in the pipeline, and it'll invalidate all downstream content and regenerate it. But even then, that's a kind of a hard problem because you need this notion of like identity throughout. Typically, it's like the input of the particular pipeline as far as what the output content will translate to. Because you can imagine, I'm dealing with very non-deterministic phenomena. And I can't just recompile and expect to get the same results for one. And in this setting, like LLMs, they can be frustratingly deterministic when it's not desired, such as when there's an error. Maybe there's even internal model parameters you can tweak if you're. It's not exposed in the consumer like ChatGPT app, but yeah, to kind of make it a little more non-deterministic or more deterministic, given the same input, and make like you can use it for kind of tweaking, like if you want to be more creative or more predictable. But yeah, even then there are settings where it's like I may want to just retry with the same input. I can try it tweaking and making it like a little more random. But yeah, if it fails, it fails, and sometimes. But then there are other cases where in that case it's too deterministic. In other cases it might be non-deterministic, but yeah, I'm dealing with like phenomena that you just can't really make any assumptions either way. And in the context of a compiler, I'm going to be invoking this. Not only that, like things can change. I almost suspect OpenAI they do things with their models in production that I don't even know how to describe. But yeah, there's like this 1 week a long time ago. I even posted it in Reddit. Never got approved by the moderators. Very frustrating. But yeah, I was like, yeah, I have this. I've been running this compilation pipeline like quite frequently, like over the past month, and then suddenly it's like error after error after error. Like I don't know what happened, but something just broke. Especially when you're populating JSON content, like they're for supporting models, especially the ones by OpenAI. There's a flag where they say they guarantee valid JSON output. It's almost never the case, or that's the case some of the times. But yeah, sometimes they'll just make very dumb syntax errors, and I can reinvoke it. Also, to keep costs low, I work with like lower end models, typically the cheapest one available. That's suitable for my needs. So it's usually just like ChatGPT 3.5 or whatever. Since writing this, I think because I started working on this like a year ago, maybe even a little bit before, but it's really a year ago when this started really taking off. And yeah, when I began, it wasn't really obvious how to go from like the beginning, nothing, to where I am now. So in some ways, I could really save you time. But okay, let's just keep going. Open up my text editor and let's delete a whole bunch of content. And then I'll explain things a little more as it's working. So we will first start with the phrasebook compiler. I need to find something that is active, such as the manifest file is active, true. I'll explain all this in just a bit. All right, deleting a whole bunch of data there. And yes, let's reinvoke it. Okay, so just to kind of add some commentary, I mentioned you can't necessarily go from nothing to something, expect good results, and generating lists like like sequences, itemized sequences, enumerated sequences, whatever. Even just in JSON arrays, generating lists in general, very difficult thing to do with LLMs for a whole multitude of reasons, and for some that might be very surprising, as I'll get into. But yeah, the first thing, I start with books, and EPUBs are especially desirable because they're essentially a zipped collection of HTML files. And why HTML? Well, for one, with EPUBs, generally each chapter corresponds to its own standalone HTML file. So there I have like the entire contents of a chapter just in one plain text file, as well as the actual HTML markup itself. There's different ways of structuring such markup in a way that could be like indistinguishable for the end user as far as the presentation rendered side. But yeah, I would love to see more semantic markup. That's the case some of the times. Other cases that isn't. Like I've seen ebooks that are EPUBs where when you dive into the source, it's like, except maybe besides like the standard HTML heading tags, it's like divs and spans, and yeah, definitely not desirable. But like I've seen others that are great. But in general, like they're pretty. The structure, internal structure, is very clean, unlike web pages. Which is a whole different beast. But I have thought of this, what I think is a pretty great idea when I was thinking of like some old ideas in like compiler transformation or transformations of tree-like data structures in general. I was thinking of like specifically like catamorphisms, and then this idea just occurred to me when it came to feeding web page content into LLMs in such a way that you can kind of almost avoid the need to like chunk contents as I have to do in this setting. But yeah, I was also wondering if I should patent that idea. I don't know. But anyway, maybe I shouldn't give too much away. But yeah, in general, let's explain it. So yeah, we start with EPUBs at the source. First part, pre-processing. I do as much as I can using what I refer to as deterministic algorithms to distinguish it from like AI models, which themselves could in some ways be highly deterministic, but there's no really guarantee either way. And in some cases, it might not even be desired, but pre-processing, cleaning. We have to clean it and then essentially reduce that HTML content to more plain text representation, suitable for feeding into an LLM. And then from there, I'm going to do maybe more cleaning. Here, for instance, extracting phrases, given the source input. This is the list of phrases that it thought should be deemed suitable for inclusion in a phrasebook dataset. Then phrase editor. Here it's really just cleaning things up. I feel like if I were to go back, I would definitely do a little bit more, but to save costs, it was like the minimum possible passes. And then from here, to JSON array, pretty simple. And then for each item in the phrasebook, we're going to generate quite a bit of metadata. But here it's kind of on that extract phrases and edit phrases and then transform the phrases to a JSON array step. Same thing, extract phrases, except it's not, the items aren't prefixed with a markdown thing. And you can imagine formatting isn't perfect. And like, why is that in parentheses? I don't know. Then here's the phrase editor. It's a little bit more cleaned up. To JSON array. And yeah, essentially we're just going over. Here's another one. It failed. Syntax error. Expected value at column. Reran it. Syntax error again. Syntax error. Syntax error. But I guess it did complete at that end. Okay. So yeah, extract phrases. Here, same thing. I'm guessing all those were available. Okay, now the EPUB pipeline is fully available. Parts, phrases. I refer to this as the alpha pipeline because I was going to do something more starting out, but didn't. Phrases, 1,252. Ideal phrases, a little over 1,000. Okay, then now we're processing the actual phrasebook dataset that'll be sent, that the apps can pull from. Here, given an input phrase, we have the English translation, grammar notes, then additional notes, the verb that is conjugated in the first person singular tense. Now, should this be in English and Spanish, what I refer to as parallel content? Probably. Same thing here, but yeah, such is what it is. There's a whole multitude of settings. I designed JSON objects in such a way as to kind of maximize likelihood of getting ideal content. to minimize errors and a whole bunch of other things. So, for instance, I may repeat myself in a few points. I may have it repeat data because with LLMs, what comes before can influence what comes next, and sometimes I'll have it explicitly repeat things when I'm populating data in such a way as to kind of help keep it on track so it doesn't get distracted. There's like a whole toolkit, and especially a toolkit that I'm even now still kind of tinkering with and just iterating and whatnot. You have to, they start doing a whole lot of creativity, I like to think. The end result, it might seem very simple. And in some cases, when I dived in, I just kind of did the obvious. But yeah, I spent a very long time doing the obvious to kind of figure things out. So yeah, here's another aspect of the phrasebook dataset, pronunciation information. Here's the input phrase, and then we have 1, 2, 3 transcriptions for different regions, even though it might all be the same. Here's the IPA transcription. Here's the simplified phonetic transcription. Now, obviously, I did the same for individual words, but I thought I would include phonetic transcriptions for an entire phrase, just because, for one, to accommodate slight variations, because in the dictionary dataset, I could include, and I probably should include, phonetic transcriptions, not for the input word, but for the actual definitions, because, as I say, 2 words can be spelled the same but have different meanings and even potentially be pronounced differently. But yeah, to save costs, I did it a particular way. But also, I'm like a poor developer, so it's like, and I was iterating just what I had to do. But anyway, yeah, region and then English notes. I have a special emphasis on pointing out silent letters like the H, and that is silent. The Z is pronounced as the, and so just as you would expect. Next step, syllableification. It's in its own JSON schema. Here's the input phrase. Here's the syllableify form. Organization phrase, categories. Here's details phrase, English translation, grammar notes. Okay, so yeah, this is another phrase, pronunciation. We're essentially going to loop through. As I mentioned, the phrasebook dataset, it's very simple. And then we go on to the dictionary. Oh, yeah, this got skipped. Now, let's do something a little more complicated. If I were to go from... Let's make sure I'm under the demo. Data, output, dictionary, dialogue. I experimented with pulling from subtitles, but yeah. Okay, so there is main and secondary. What is the difference? Let's find out. Let's just delete a whole bunch of words beginning with A. This is under the demo. I did do a hard copy, and hopefully that includes like symbolic links or whatever. I don't know. I don't want surprises, especially since it's not. Probably should be committed to the Git tree, but like I just wasn't sure. Now I think there was one phrase that failed, so it's gonna probably retry that. Actually, I invoked the dictionary compiler specifically, and yeah, sometimes I'll just have it pull phrases. I want to skip generation of things that need to be generated and just pull from what's available. I don't know what I set the settings to. Okay, yep. Now we are at the dataset part. Word definitions. Word, that, meaning, English or Spanish, and then English. I refer to that as a bilingual dataset. And yeah, it's really hard-coded for like language learning for like native English speakers for Spanish. But you can imagine there's a whole multitude of languages, and there's a whole multitude of people who will be learning from this background as far as what they speak natively to like language X. I'd love to have a more general pipeline. Initially, I was thinking I would generalize things, but this itself, as manifested, very specific to these assumptions. And then at one point, I was like, maybe I'll just copy and paste it between supported languages. But yeah, I would like to redo it. There are some local companies in the language learning space. I think I'm just going to figure out how to reach out to them somehow. But yeah, word definition. So what did I delete? We should see something from, oh yeah, so here's an input word. And it has multiple definitions. For each definition, there's the meaning, closest translation, part of speech, the lemma, like the base form, AL. Is that even correct? I don't know. I should probably do a little more checking, but just to save costs. Transcriptions, categories, very difficult. Failed JSON validation, failed JSON. Then I guess it succeeded. Word display, input word, syllables, display label, capitalized, and then display label translation to the tags, auxiliary definition. So yeah, I do, when generating multiple definitions per word entry, also what I refer to as the auxiliary definition, where for each unique definition, I kind of want to essentially regenerate the definition. Now, it's a little hard to get right because I need to really pinpoint what it is I'm referring to. This word, that can have multiple meanings though, so I need to also communicate it is the word that corresponds to this definition. Just to be extra specific, I may also give it the part of speech. And yeah, there's quite a bit of prompt engineering to just try to keep it on point. And as I mentioned, you can really tune the dataset for application-specific needs. One obvious case is here we might want a long-form definition, but then in other settings, such as depending on the device resolution or whatever, we want a more short-form definition, especially if we're displaying entries under like a search term. So yeah, here's long definition in both Spanish and English, and then here's the short definition, regions, and some example sentences. Because yeah, when you're generating multiple entries in one LLM invocation in like a list or whatever, yeah, things can influence each other in maybe potentially undesirable ways. So once I have that list, I may want to regenerate particular aspects in a more standalone context, just to be rock solid as far as what the data set that I may be presenting to the user or whatever. Especially even the example sentences, because if you're generating a lot of stuff in a list, especially if it's like JSON, list of objects, LLMs, I don't know how it works, but I suspect there's some kind of mechanism at play where if the length, it's almost like it could have predicted too, where if the length is long, it'll kind of try to abbreviate or reduce wording in such a way that, so if I'm generating a list of objects, which includes example sentences, I may want to regenerate example sentences in a more standalone context. Technically, the example sentences themselves could be considered part of the phrasebook compiler. And I could really go on this back and forth where I go from. So generally, currently, the dictionary compiler is downstream of the phrasebook compiler, just because I wanted to make sure there's a dictionary definition or entry for each word in the phrasebook. So it's like I may as well, after done with the phrasebook compiler, take the entire set of words, pass that down to the dictionary compiler. Now here's one thing I definitely want to change. It's been driving me crazy, especially when I have to remark about it. And it also drives me crazy when I see this in commercial apps on the App Store. But yeah, you cannot necessarily define a word as a sequence of characters separated by space. Because there's a lot of like semantics at play when it comes to like natural language. And one is you can have technically what's a word, but it could have spaces in between. And I'll probably just end up using LLMs for that inference. But yeah, it's just more cost. I didn't do it. But the dictionary compiler can support that. But yeah, currently I just define the word list as all unique words in like a given sequence of text fragments separated by spaces, which isn't ideal. But for one, I'm going to be doing that anyway. And then I'll probably have like a higher level, like I think they're called compound words. I could be wrong. So you could get the definition for a compound word or like the individual words thereof. And yeah, technically I could go from like phrasebook to the dictionary. That's going to include example sentences per word. And then I could take those example sentences, pass that back into the phrasebook compiler, and just go through this loop and generate a ton of content. But yeah, okay, word definitions. Word, A, or maybe it's A or whatever. Meaning, here it has two different meanings. One is a noun, feminine, lemma, A, and then the other is, and the closest translation is A and for English. Here, closest translation to, and it's a preproposition. Preproposition that indicates the starting or origin of a movement. First letter and first vowel of the Spanish alphabet. Okay. Pronunciations, pretty much all the same. Categories, agent, means, purpose. Okay, I suppose that works. Display, syllable, two. You can imagine, let's go back to, I'm just going to spin up the desktop representation. Let's make sure I'm recording. Oof. Definitely, you don't like that when you leave it on the cam, but you think you're recording the desktop, but you're really not. All right, if Xcode will spin up. Is this thing still running? Oh, yeah, that's just doing its thing. I love how you can see the feed. So yeah, as you can probably infer, everything's kind of running. It's all like async functions under the hood. I don't know because these models, I'm making them over like network, like HTTP APIs, such as like OpenAI. I do use Mistral. The Mistral low-end models, I think it's just Mistral small or whatever. Very good at, for one, very cheap, but also very good at correcting for like JSON syntax errors. So sometimes I'd like play around with different heuristics or like fallback strategies. One is if this low-end model can't make it work, go to maybe a more expensive higher-end model. Another is go with an equally like low-end cheap model, but try it from a different platform, such as instead of one from OpenAI, go with Mistral. And also looking back, if I were to go out of my way, I'd probably fine-tune the models I'm actually using instead of using like off-the-shelf GPT models, for instance. But yeah, that's a topic for another day. But yeah, it is very interesting just watching the feed. It can also be very frustrating when it's like repeatedly making a mistake and it just seems so obvious. Like, what the heck is going on? Like, these things can appear very smart, but I feel like the interface matters. When you're using these things in an automated like workflow context, they can make dumb mistakes and they can just keep making it. And yeah, there are different strategies. Like I might try to simulate more conversational style interface. I'm working on a XML format for defining LLM workflows. And yeah, there's this one idea I'm really excited about, a very simple feature, but I just refer to it as breakpoints, where it's like evaluate all prior messages up to this breakpoint and then take the output and create a new message and then append that to the conversation history based on the like role as specified by the breakpoint element. Then you can do better like chain of thought style reasonings where you can say, hey, here's this brainstorm tactics or whatever to achieve this goal. Then it'll do that and it'll be like, all right, let's try to arrive at an answer, but explain your reasoning along the way. But then at the very end, you may want to make one final invocation just to ensure that what it's emitting corresponds to like just the answer and just the answer. And yeah, breakpoint messages, very excited about that. I do something like that here, but it's in a much more verbose manner. I am using a templating language. If you were to, my own library, if you were to go to Kolben.com/AI subsystems, it doesn't display it in the README, but yeah, it's essentially HTML file, partly just because I would get better, I don't know, it's really the default. XML can be a little more strict than HTML parsers. And I may get better dev tools, like if I have XML like DSLs that can link to other files via like a source attribute. If it's HTML prefix, I get better dev tools for that, where I can just click on the link and it will automatically open up the file based on the relative file path. But yeah, essentially a file collection of prompts. Each prompt can have the name, very important, and then like default model attributes. You can override this via like how you're invoking it, like either via CLI or like the library API. But yeah, and then essentially just a collection of messages for the child contents of any particular prompt element. And yeah, the contents underneath that are just plain text. I am working on I had a rewrite, but then I was like, all right, I'm going to rewrite the rewrite. So the rewrite of the rewrite is under super Swift dev. Yes. Go to repositories. It is web automation. Completely non-functional. I'm still kind of in the design phase, but I did have a brief working prototype. If you go to super Swift dev web compiler, the GitHub repo, you can see it right here, github.com/super Super Swift Dev. I was thinking of originally because like as an iOS dev, I was like, I don't know, start my own agency and call it that. I haven't made up my mind though, so it's just whatever works right now. Web compiler. This is more for static sites. This is gonna definitely turn into its own video, but that's a topic for another day. But there's a lot of sophisticated functionality in the web compiler that I was gonna bake into the new prompt templating medium via like an XML DSL. But then at some point that was just too much of a pain, especially with select dependencies. So I'm just gonna work on a complete rewrite that I'll place under web automation, and it will just whatever functionality I need from web compiler, I'm just gonna re-implement it, but very ad hoc to the needs of this XML format. I can't make up my mind. I was thinking of just calling it like XML AI. That could work great because I think there's an .ai like top level domain or generic top level domain, or should it be like AI XML? I asked ChatGPT once and it said the latter, AI XML, for different reasons. But I don't know, kind of leaning towards XML AI. But I suppose names are like insignificant unless you're like a JavaScript hipster, which I don't know. But yeah, here's that message breakpoint feature I mentioned. So it's like, you are a helpful assistant. What is heavier, a kilo of feathers or a pound of steel? Message breakpoint. So the new message that will be appended to the conversation history. Let's make sure I'm recording the desktop. In fact, maybe this should be a little smaller. Role assistant. Okay, yeah, where was I? Yeah, it'll basically evaluate these two messages in an LLM invocation. The results will be a new message based on this role. And then, yeah, next one, explain your reasoning. So technically, this should probably go first. It's just an example I threw out. Then we have another breakpoint where the reasoning will go into a new message. Then it's like, would you like to revise the answer? Breakpoint. And then at the end, finally, after considering your thoughts, please state just the answer, just as a final check. If you were to use this in like a data generation population context, it's great to just have that final check where you're like, I'm interested in just the answer, and I'm interested in the answer and just the answer and nothing more. But yeah, before it was basically, it doesn't say it under the in the README file for the library that this current pipeline is using. But yeah, it does support liquid features under the hood where you can pass it in a global, like this, what represents like a global JSON object as the environment. And yeah, it can be like, if there are errors, then do this. Here's the instructions. Let's see, where is it? At some point we're going to be like, oh yeah, for errors, and we're basically just doing like a conversational style interface where it will display the response, and then another user would be like, display the error message and be like, there's an issue with your compiled JSON object. And then at the end, I may want one final just to keep it on track. Please fix the issue or whatever. I don't know if this should be a system message though. Maybe that should just be another user message. But at any rate, I'm thinking of rewriting it. Here's the proposed format where I have a dedicated for one tag for defining schemas as an external file. Source schema1.json, the ID, because there is in web compiler lexically scoped binding environment based on the block structure of the XML elements. Very useful. For instance, include this common main, and we're going to pass in a file some HTML content into the included file based on the child contents of the include element. And then under common main, we have like another two more includes. One is the header, footer, but then under main, there'll just be content. And whenever compiler sees content, it'll just substitute the HTML tree as passed in by the like parent or host context. But you can also transform that. I refer to as macro tags. So you can like have files that include other files, but you can also pass in stuff to those included files. So a great example is like a tabbed view, where I was taking inspiration from Swift UI and really applying that to like HTML content. And yeah, some great ideas I think is particularly interesting. But because, yeah, Swift UI, there's some great aspects I love about the framework, just as far as like what you can do when it comes to UI frameworks. And yeah, imagine manifesting some of those features in like a static site compiler. I refer to it as a static site compiler as to opposed to a generator, because the target market, if, as you might say, is really geared towards web developers, and especially like tons of businesses, they will have an online presence that might be very important for the business. especially for like customer acquisition and representing themselves online as far as the online presence is concerned. But yeah, it's essentially static content, and why use WordPress when you could make do with simpler and definitely improve in, like, what does Google call it? Site vitals or page vitals. It's not necessarily a game changer when it comes to SEO, but they have said that it tends to be that it does act as a tiebreaker when all other things are equal, as they tend to be when you're dealing with like local businesses, and all of their sites equally suck. But yeah. Anyway, this is a digression, but there's a lot of sophisticated functionality. But return to web automation. I'm just gonna use like HTML, like text, as you might say, container nodes, where the child elements will just be like will either be text or inline elements, such as paragraph tags, just to better control formatting. Since my philosophy is anything you evaluate with an LLM in these like automated like pipelines or workflows matters, and I'm very careful at making sure that whatever I'm feeding in is perfect. Like another thing, I am using HTML files because I usually have at least spell check turned on by default for such file types. But here I have a prompt called fixed JSON object, where we give it a schema and a string that's essentially a JSON value, but it's of type string because it could be syntactically invalid as well. And here we just say paragraph, here's a malformed JSON object. And then another paragraph, but we're saying from JSON value and pretty print it. And this is just a better control formatting with regards to like how we're interpolating text and larger text contents, all under like a message element. I've also shortened message to just MSSG as far as the tag name is concerned. And yeah, it should control formatting, especially because I like to indent things. But yeah, I think prefixing each block essentially via a paragraph tag will be better. I can still have indentation, but that shouldn't be. I do like manually unindent if it is indented, but I suppose it's not perfect. But anyway, this is a bit of a digression. Let's see, the compiler generator is still doing its thing. Oh yeah, there's another problem. If prompts in this new system I'm considering can itself represent multiple LLM workflows and some like can itself represent multiple LLM work invocations and some kind of like workflow oriented setup or whatever. If I define all the model parameters or whatnot in the prompt element, I don't know if I have multiple LLM invocations, I might want to change things along the way. So what I'm thinking, extend the acceptable child contents for a prompt element and add a set tag where you can be response format equals JSON object. Now, I'm using off-the-shelf HTML parsers, and due to the terrible nature of web standards, there is a concept of void elements, which are those that don't have a closing end tag. But yeah, it's the only acceptable list is a hard-coded list of like 16 void elements, and if it's outside of that context, it will not parse appropriately. It is the most frustrating thing ever. If you're dealing with like standard compliant HTML parsers, one day I'm just gonna have to write my own HTML parsers because yeah, it's just such. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm just getting angry because of it. But yeah, due to the terrible nature of standards compliant HTML parsers, that has influenced some aspects of when I'm dealing with like parsing HTML content and whatnot. But yeah, anyway, here set model parameters. It's kind of like in like, but you can also override it down the road. And yeah, messages. Here's a breakpoint. Instead of like breakpoint element very long, I'm just doing breakpoint, but then of type message, role assistant, and whatever. And but let's return back to AI subsystems under github.com/colbin/AI subsystems. Actually, I'm recording the desktop. Yes. Yeah, this is what I'm using currently. And yeah, maybe we should start diving into some of the prompts. Okay, here's dictionary compiler. Here's phrasebook compiler. Let's make sure. I hope I didn't really go off track. So yeah, let's re-talk about this compiler generator pipeline from scratch, just to make sure. So as I mentioned, I have a preference for EPUBs as far as the source content. But yeah, that first part of the pipeline I referred to as the ingestation phase, processing EPUBs into more plain text representation, cleaning that up, passing that onto the phrasebook compiler. That's going to extract phrases, clean it up, and we're going to have a JSON array of phrases. And then for each phrase, I'm going to correspond metadata. That's going to pass on to the dictionary compiler. It's a little more complicated, but essentially the same thing. Input word, but identity is also a problem. If I delete, for instance, the file that defines all particular definitions for a given input word, I need to make sure I invalidate all downstream contents. And also for there's going to be the input word, then we're going to have definitions, but for each definition, there's going to be associated like what you might say is like a sub data set. And yeah, I wanted to delete things, invalidate all downstream content. I need a unique way of referring to things throughout. So identity is a problem. But yeah, should I discuss some of the prompts? It's pretty simple, especially the prompt data set is particularly simple. But it's like prompts, it's under its own directory, such as toJSON array. Here's the liquid value. I do follow this common format where for errors and errors, so I could simulate more conversational style interface. And then if the errors exist, I do one final message. I don't know how I feel about how I formatted this. Yeah, when it comes to prompt engineering, okay, so maybe I should back up. When you're interacting with LLM models via like the backend like developer APIs or whatever, there are things that you can do that aren't available in like consumer friendly or just like consumer oriented like chatbot apps. There are different like parameters you can tweak, for instance, to kind of influence like is the model going to be more random or predictable. Yeah, and in general, especially for those that follow a conversational style interface, it's essentially a list of messages as far as what you're ultimately passing, as far as what a LLM model is ultimately evaluating. Each message is a JSON object with two particular properties in general. One is the role, it kind of sets the context for the overall, and then the other is content, which is just the actual text contents of that message. And the role kind of specifies context for that message. Very important. So the first message is there are three roles, system, user, and assistant. The system role, very important. It sets like the global behavior of the chatbot. You can, in that setting, kind of tell it to assume a particular persona. So when I'm generating dictionary data sets, I might instruct it to take on what's called a lexicographer persona, such as someone who is paid to compile dictionary data sets. Just one heuristic to kind of get it to converge to generating ideal results. Then after that, typically user messages. So it's usually like what the user types into a chatbot. That will be a message under the user role. And then the model will evaluate that, return output, and then that will typically correspond to a message, but with the assistant role. And then after that, it just usually goes back and forth between like user, assistant, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I follow that same setup. And so one problem is what do you do when errors? In this kind of system, errors can and do happen all the time, as you saw in the example output. And yeah, I have to accommodate that somehow. And yeah, one option is just to retry it. Maybe tweak the temperature to make it a little more, add some like variability. That often doesn't work. I feel like what works best is either evaluating it against different models and or conversational style interface. So there'll be a system message, user message, and then if there's an error, I'll then loop over all errors, keep reevaluating it, but I am sending it over a conversation history where there'll be like the assistant, whatever replied back, then it'll be user message saying, hey, there's an error, whatever, and just telling it to please fix the results. That works very well. It does bloat because you can imagine when you're generating data sets at a certain scale, especially when you're iterating during development, where I might change something about it, whole swaths of data that need to be generated. The cost of input tokens do add up, especially when you're like especially when you have whole like conversation style dialogue almost, or whatever, or heuristics. I don't know what you call it. Another option, if there's an error, try the same prompt but against a different model, such as it's a syntax error. Misdrill, very good at correcting JSON syntax errors, but it might not be so good on the semantics, especially when it corresponds to JSON schemas. So in general, when I'm populating data, I may start with like arbitrary content, but at some point I'm going to make my way to machine readable formats like JSON, and in that case, everything is driven by JSON schemas. Now, if you can have a mechanism in place to kind of validate the results of LLM output, that goes a very long way. And so yeah, in that context, there's typically the system message. Then there's going to be the like schema. I'll typically interpolate the schema in the system message text. But then there's going to be the user message, and that's going to represent like what I'm after for that particular instance. And then the other global variable might be like errors. If there's an error in a prior invocation, I'm trying to regenerate it. And yeah, that's one option. But I did forget. Let's go back to the ingestation phase. Somewhat of a hard problem. I said I have a preference for ebooks, but actually, one second. I think I'm going to, where's the video feed? Pause it and resume in just a sec. Okay, I'm back. Now let's see. How's the dictionary compiler? I noticed I was kind of just going on with regard to whatever came to mind, but how I'm presenting this, it's somewhat unstructured. But let's go back to ingestation. In general, I'm interested in working with EPUBs is what I call the seed. But even from there, so in that context, there's two directories that matter. One is what I call the input directory or the source directory. I'll take all the ebooks that I'm interested in, EPUBs, throw them under that directory, and then my system is gonna go over all EPUB file entries in the directory, and create a corresponding directory in what I call the workspace directory, where ultimately it's going to be like workspace directory. Then there's going to be the EPUB name as a directory name. And then underneath that, there'll be a special file called the manifest file. That will kind of control how this works in the larger ingestion pipeline. For instance, there's a global property called isActive that defaults to false. And if that is true, if that is false, then it will just be excluded for consideration in the processing pipeline. But if that is true, then from there, I'm really only interested in a particular subset of the EPUB pipeline. I'm really only interested in a particular subset of the EPUB, of all EPUB contents. And in general, when it comes to EPUBs, there's this metadata file called, I can't remember, but there's this particular property underneath called the spine. And it's essentially a list of identifiers that defines the overall like linear order of the digital like book from start to finish if we were just to like flip through or scroll through the pages. And yeah, that's great, because then using that spine information, I can say I'm interested in this subset of data, and I can say feed this subset down this pipeline, and then from there it preprocesses it into a more plain text representation while also chunking it. I could be a little smarter, but as I mentioned, EPUBs, they're not always structured in a semantically meaningful manner. So, but at the very least, I do try to break chunks by paragraphs. I try to be somewhat smart about it, but I think what I currently have is very naive, and it's a very hard problem. I could use more semantic information, but yeah, such is what it is. But what I do like about EPUB is generally one HTML file, one chapter. That itself, a great property. And yes, for each chunk, then I feed it through the first step of the phrasebook compiler, which is extracting and cleaning and editing and whatnot phrases. And let me think. So, let's see, where are we? We're still on the dictionary dataset. Have I gone over the example output? So yeah, like here's, oh, we just finished. Now it's compiling the SQLite database file, which is great because at one point I just compiled everything into this giant JSON file. And let's get the size of it. Do -h data output assets. Okay, so yeah, it's 11 megs. As JSON, will probably be a lot more for some reason. Especially if it's pretty printed or not. I think one time I just did like a pre-printed JSON file. I don't even know if it was 11 megs. It might have been smaller, but yeah, it took forever. Like on my desktop, it was instantaneous, but as soon as I opened it up from a low-end like iPhone device, yeah, it took forever just to bring that into memory, parse it into JSON, and then parse that into a particular data model. Yeah, SQLite is great. Does not cause problems. And then from there, there are JSON like fields, but yeah, it's just not generally a problem at that point. But shall we explore the I don't know if that's already the default. Select everything from dictionary, main, limit, 5. Okay, so let's try to improve format. Headers on, I want to say. Mode lines. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, that's a little better. I wish I could also just have it automatically pretty print JSON objects, but JSON should really be its own special type. If we were to look at the schema, oh yeah, let's do that from the beginning. Tables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total tables. Phrasebook entry, and then the rest correspond to the dictionary, where it's dictionary main, dictionary definition, what's the difference between main and definition, and then there's secondary. I think that's like auxiliary data, and then vocabulary, which is like pronunciation details. I don't know. It's really dictionary main and then dictionary secondary. That's important. That'll make more sense when we open up the schema. Phrasebook entry, term searchable, details. But yeah, this is all JSON. I think JSON is really just a type alias for a type. It should really be its own type because then the compiler will have a little more context when it comes to like pretty printing in the terminal. That would be great if I can just pretty print JSON fields on the spot without having to write a more complicated like select statement or whatnot. But yeah, dictionary vocabulary. There's term searchable. It's really just a more ASCII representation to kind of simplify that. Notes, lemmas, default lemma notes, relationship description. That's from the lemmatization phase of the dictionary compiler. Here we have the dictionary definition. It's defined by term, index, and the main, as well as the hash. So if I were to delete a file that corresponds to the main dictionary entry, that should regenerate all definitions and then all dependent subdata from there. There's also a dictionary auxiliary, dictionary secondary. I think that's just the auxiliary definition.
Someone's at the doorbell.
I don't know what that's about. Okay, so select everything from dictionary. Someone should get it. Select everything from dictionary main, limit, 5. Okay, yeah, here we have term searchable, definitions, pronunciation, categories, word display, and tags. Under definitions, yeah, term searchable, definition index. How can I present this in a more like aesthetically pleasing manner? But then there is also dictionary secondary, limit, 5. Okay, yeah, auxiliary definition. It's really just, it kind of corresponds to the JSON schema of, it makes it, I think this is easier to present in the context of just showing the JSON schemas. So one thing I love about JSON schemas, you can have definitions for reusable things. Great, because especially if JSON schemas, if they're just too, I don't know, because indirection, it can be harder for models to work with, but at the same time they're pretty good at inferring, and also like just overall token limits, they do matter. And yeah, if you want great output, it's something to consider. So yeah, definitions, I use this a lot, where it's basically, I just refer to it as like parallel content with two properties, Spanish and English. Just because it's so common. And then throughout, like long definition, short definition, that's all parallel content. Regions and example sentences, essentially, because there's the auxiliary definition, but if we were to go to the main, where is it? Oh yeah, populate main. This is the liquid file. Pretty much as you expect, system message, whatnot. Where's the schema? Populate main.js. Is there not a schema for that? Oh yeah, here's the system message. Welcome, lexicographer. I sometimes have ChatGPT to kind of help me, at least for the rough draft of like when I'm doing like prompt engineering stuff. And I notice when I have it generate the system message, it does so in a way that's kind of surprising. Like it's not so narratively. I don't know how to explain it. And there are some things I go back and forth on whether or not, like, should it be like markdown style lists as you see here, especially like numbered or enumerated lists, or should it be like, should I avoid new lines, for instance, at all costs? I have not made up my mind. I'd love to know though, like objectively, what's better. Okay, yeah, this is part of the Spanish. Original word is Spanish. Confidence score. Where's the schema for the main task? There's definitely a schema somewhere. Populate main. Yeah, because we're passing in. Okay, let's just look at the source code. Execute request. Where's the globals? Okay, yeah, this returns request builder. Is there not a schema for it? I see source, name, number of trials, use alternate instructions, but where's the schema? I think that's a constant. Where the heck is this? This is what happens when I should have made these videos when, yeah, details are still fresh on my mind. Maybe it's under a different name. There's categories, pronunciation, tags, word. Maybe I'll just call it word definitions. It should just be. Oh, yep, here it is. Okay, I apologize. Yeah, properties, input word. So technically this is kind of correspond to the output, but I sometimes have it repeat things just to really keep it on track. So even when I'm generating content, I still want it to have it emit the input word just to make sure it's staying on track. And then for that, definitions array. For each, it's a array of objects where for each each object will be of the particular format. Meaning, the meaning of the word defined in Spanish, Espanol, or whatever, and English, and it's a type parallel content. So we should get a Spanish and English description, and then the closest translation, the closest English word or phrase. The part of speech, you do have to constrain it because sometimes it can be way too detailed or generate in a. Yeah, I really want, especially the part of speech, to be of a predefined list. It should cover pretty much all possible options that are like for like a beginner-oriented bilingual dictionary dataset. Lima. There's technically a dedicated phase for this, but I suppose just yeah. Gender, it can be either string or null, where if it's string, it is either masculine, feminine, or like neutral, neuter, whatever. Gender opposite, optional, just extra metadata. And then from here, each entry, each definition will then have, most of these schemas kind of correspond to the definition, but what is JSON generation? You'll fix all JSON syntax errors, JSON schema model validation errors, and then compile the corrected JSON dataset. I don't know if that's a bad system message. Oh, wait, maybe that's if errors is greater than 1. Yeah, I don't know. I did try to generalize this somehow. I think I got a good idea in mind going forward, but yeah, I experimented with compiling datasets from subtitles. I found this torrent. It was like this massive collection, and it was all compressed subtitles. It took forever to download, but I don't even know if it's still, if you can still download that. But yeah, including from like whole multitude of movies and whatnot, especially like non-native, especially those with like non-English or even movies. Maybe they were originally produced in English, but they have like subtitles in other languages. It was great, but yeah, I'm not currently using that for anything. I should have a backup of it somewhere though. And yes, I don't know. There's a lot of details. I probably missed some in this video, but yeah, I'm just really diving in. And then there's the what I call the rough draft. That might also be good if you're really want to dive into this background. This video is getting kind of long. It says it's at 1 hour and 17 minutes. And yeah, okay, what I should have given a pretty good demonstration of the overall pipeline from start to finish. Some particular aspects of the pipeline, some of the prompt engineering aspects, some problems. Did I mention how, yeah, for instance, like it's really hard to categorize or just generating list-like content in general. I use JSON schemas where throughout especially when I'm doing like generating JSON stuff. And JSON schemas are great because I can just use JSON schemas as a validation check. If I were to really go out of my way, maybe I do more like plain text, but of a particular format that a machine can parse and validate. But yeah, JSON schemas, I can do a lot with that in a manner that it is more verbose as far as, and I definitely try to minimize that when just because my philosophy is to break problems down into like fundamental like components and essentially into like LLM invocations where each invocation is just doing one thing and one thing only, and then that'll pass it on to the next step to try to keep things robust. So especially when I'm working with low-end models, I don't expect it to do that much, but it's just if I can break problems down into small pieces and then for each piece that'll correspond to like an LLM invocation or whatnot or a series of such, where it's just doing one thing in a larger pipeline and then passing that on. The resulting data set can be pretty sophisticated, I like to think. And yeah, I should really I don't know. I really, in some ways, I almost feel like the video record last night was a little better in some ways. But yeah, stepping back. maybe let's end the recording. I'll just think about what else I'll say. So yep, I'll no end the recording, but like pause it. Or no, I don't know. What else? So yeah, I think I got a big front to back, start to finish overview, and I've showed the app how it manifested. I think what I'm going to do is also produce a video that's a little shorter, where I'll just do everything in abstract. But yeah, this is what I consider to be the long form introduction. And yeah, so I have the data set. But also, I really want to re-emphasize that this was in the context of a bilingual dictionary and phrasebook data set. But there are lots of cases in software where you need stuff that would otherwise be compiled by like a team of writers. And especially if it's like dictionary related, they're called like lexicographers, I believe, specifically. And yeah, that can be very detailed. But also, you might want to like even iterate on the particular data set that you're manually compiling. I even thought about this myself. I was like, I could write it out myself, maybe just to start out. But I don't know. As a programmer, I like to streamline things, especially as someone who likes to make tools. And also, I want to be able to like iterate on like particular like nature of a particular data set. So one thing, like this data set itself is very sparse, partly for cost, but you can do a lot with it. One such example that I think would be kind of cool is let's can I close Xcode while keeping the app running? Closing this will stop the task. Run app. Perhaps not, but then this fans back up. But at any rate, animals, basic, cause, business. People and relationships, perhaps. Do I show base forms of word in this interface? I don't know if I am. Let's go to full dictionary. Well, I definitely am right here, that's for sure. Base abrigo equals to this entry that does not have a definition in the compiler. But where am I? All right, let's back up. I'm still kind of getting into the emotions when it comes to recording presentations, especially very long form, like unscripted presentations. And yeah, there's usually a lot in my head, but sometimes when I step in front of a camera, my brain just shuts off. So I'm still kind of getting better. I definitely believe in the power of iteration. Solved a lot of hard problems that way, or as I like to call it, like sheer brute force. Yeah, so I just expect like whenever I dive into something, the initial results probably won't be the most polished, but I do like to think that I get better over time, and over time, via small refinements, I can get somewhere where I'm, I don't know, pretty good in some aspect with regard to what I've been after a certain like length of like trial and error and iteration. But yeah, as I was talking about the broader applicability in businesses, oh yeah, like some of the cool things I experimented with were like mnemonics, such as now I'm not very good at coming up with mnemonics, so this is with regards to like my baseline, but in that regard, LLMs, they're very good at coming up with like mnemonic suggestions for like arbitrary content. And I was like, I did experiment with it. I ended up excluding it from the data set. But at one point, I had quite a few schemas for various aspects like mnemonics, etymological details, some more ad hoc stuff for like Spanish verbs and whatnot. I want to do like, especially like I've seen like charts of Spanish verbs that I wanted to have in an app context. And yeah, maybe I'll return to that down the road because I think there's definitely value to that. Especially because like this is a native app and I'm pretty good at presenting information when I want to. Even though like, yeah, this popover, this UI needs to be completely redone. But yeah, as I mentioned, the UI was kind of an afterthought after I spent so much time on the data set. And then I get to I'm very good at going like 99%. Then it's like that 1% where I just need to like upload it to the App Store, for instance. And yeah, I'm too much of a perfectionist, maybe. But yeah, I also want to just rewrite the entire app side while reusing the data set. But yeah, I could add like mnemonics, etymological details, maybe some things. So a lot of this is in the context of what I'm generating during development, and then I'll have this like data set that I'll just bundle with the app, and that is great because it's all offline, self-contained, no network dependencies, which I do try to avoid in my context because as an indie developer, I would love to just like write something, release it, and potentially forget about it if need be, and move on. Especially if it's like a commercial thing, maybe I could like write it, release it, still maybe make a bit of money on the side, but just forget about it. And that's great. But if there are like, if it depends on web services, that's something that will always be in the back of my mind because like, I don't know, things can just crash or whatever. Even, and yeah, like, and I don't want to break functionality on the app side. So if I can keep things as self-contained, offline, no network dependencies, then that's a great option. But yeah, there's also a lot you could do. Like users could upload books that they're reading, for instance, and you can really do things like on demand in that case. Especially users could select some words and then generate stuff that's more useful for like flashcards, like mnemonics based on this flashcard collection. Um, but moving forward, I need to start like I don't know. I really want to just get paid upfront instead of like releasing something to the App Store and going down that route. And yeah, I think not very many people have really explored this idea, at least to the length I have, of data generation. Now, there's in the context of like a pretty obvious problem like dictionary data sets. But I don't know. I spent like so much time. I'd like to monetize it somehow, and I think I have something to offer for some companies. I know there are like local language learning companies that are definitely on my mind to reach out to. But then after that, I've been wondering like what additional settings could like the principles behind what I'm doing be applicable. I don't know. I've wondered about like video game dialogue. I don't really play video games that much unless I'm like super sick, like to the point where it's like if it gets, I can't do anything else, and if it gets my mind off of like just the general, like being sick, you feel like crap, then whatever works. Yeah, I wish I could get into video games. Like I'm only in. I'm in general. I'm into like two or three things. They're all bad for you. Like my hands, they're not what they used to be. Just because, yeah, keyboards. They're not designed for like these flashy limbs, whatever. Especially when you type a lot, as I have. It's very frustrating too. But because I'm not really where I want to be in life, and it's like I've ruined my hands to what end or whatever. But yeah, I don't want it to be about me. I have like worn out the paint, especially like down arrow. I use that a lot for autocomplete. Yeah, it's like in general, like the keyboard goes out before anything else. And yeah, at some point, like I always get my machines used. Like this audio set, this mic, I just got it used for $30. And yeah, it is perfect. I have like no complaints. And yeah, especially Apple devices, I get them all used. Just 'cause especially Apple devices, they tend to last a while. And for me, it's like I burned through keyboards, and they're like baked in such a way that you can really only replace the top. At least on the older models, I don't even know if it's worth trying to replace components in this laptop. But yeah, I even replaced the battery once, and like I was getting like sparks, weird odors, and luckily it did not blow up in my face. But yeah, I was glued to the frame. I had to pry it off before doing anything else. Very unappreciated for what's supposed to be like a premium brand. They shouldn't be gluing things to the internal frame. um, but yeah, I also have another bad habit of moving away from. Haven't really done anything in that regard in a very long time. I like to think of myself as a changed individual in that regard. Um, But yeah, unfortunately, I do also like to write on the side, just because I don't really have any like side projects. I'm either like programming, and then when I'm burnt out from that, I like to like just write for fun and write about whatever. But yeah, writing nowadays, I almost feel like it's a liability. Like, um, I don't know, people are crazy online, and like I might appear crazy myself, but it's like people how they interpret things. Like it's, I don't know, like imagination is liability in a sense if you express it publicly, even if it's just for like fun or whatever. But let's see, where am I? Complete digression. Staying focused, work oriented. Yeah, why was I talking about myself in the first place? So I do have this problem where like I've read books that would contain a lot of digressions. Like I remember this. I think it was actually the audiobook. I don't read it like as much paperback books as I used to, especially when I was a kid. But yeah, I'm just busy. But yeah, it was a really interesting talk. There's just so much travel log or whatever, and it drove me crazy. And I just feel like the author probably didn't really have much going on in her life, so it's like she just had to express it, and he would listen to captive audience. But then there's like the rational optimist, where there's tons of digressions, and I loved it, like very interesting digressions. Um, so yeah, if I'm gonna digress in a video because I can't help it. Like my brain's just going like I start here and I end up going there. I've also been known for being like very random apparently, even though like as far as like the causal like chain of events that occurred in my brain, even though there might be like a coherent like chain of events in that regard. But yeah, if you're gonna do digressions, keep it interesting. But yeah, I do say that like as someone who likes to write, like with regard to that former author I mentioned. But yeah, it's just when you're consuming content, I don't know. But anyway, backing up again, talking about my work, how this is more widely applicable. And yeah, I was wondering like video games. Oh yeah, I was like, I don't play video games that much. It'd be ironic if I get into that industry, but yeah, I was wondering because some video games. I remember playing Skyrim when I was a kid, and there's just lots of stuff to read in the game. And could that be streamlined in some way? I don't know. But yeah, there's video games. Like, what other markets could I really explore? And especially with the emphasis on like businesses that are like local in my area, where I could just like, if I want to, like show up to the office and be like, "Hey, my name is Colbin Wadman, and you didn't ask for me or want for me, but somehow I made it through the door and past the receptionist or whatever. And yeah, do you have a moment to? How would I? I've done this before. Like when I was a kid, I made up my mind to just start up a ISP company. And based on the technology and whatnot and constraints that I had in mind, I can't remember the details, but I was thinking like high density residential spaces. And yeah, there was this apartment complex where apparently I just walked in and was able to speak to someone of some importance. And later on, I was talking to a local ISP, a business owner, and he was like, "Man, I sent like literally like 5 guys to that place, and it was like none of them made it through the door, but apparently I did." Even though that didn't go anywhere in my regard, although I didn't have a product to actually like commit to a sale, but I don't know. It's just interesting what you can do when you're naive and dumb. And yeah, sometimes I feel like it's great to just dive in, but in that context, like there's really no predicting where it's gonna go. So that's probably why I want to start recording more videos, especially like I'm really like I want to be in like I want to do things when I'm these kind of high stakes things or whatever. When I'm in like when I'm in what I perceive to be like optimal presence, energy, or whatever. But I think it's good to like last night video. I was super tired, but I did it, and I was like, yeah, I seemed fine throughout. If anything, I think I did some things better in that, even though I considered it to be like the draft leading up to this. Whereas this video, it almost felt a little messier. So maybe when I'm not as energetic, I'm a little more on point and focused. So yeah, in general, I need to get to the point where I can just do work with like potential clients or whatever, like individuals of importance in real life, in any state of mind. And not only that, if I try to only do things when I'm in like an optimal like energy or whatever, just because of the nature, like if the not necessarily high stakes, but if I'm trying to get something that it could be very valuable long term, then it makes sense to really like do things when I feel like it's optimal. But I can't always do things around my schedule, for instance. And even then, like there's no predicting what state I'm going to be in at any particular point. But yeah, I just need to flesh out things. I feel like these videos are great. This one may not be perfect, but if I stick at it, down the road I should be pretty good at compiling presentations, and that should, especially if I try to open up more, show a little more personality. I can build this like toolkit of even like talking points or whatever. So when I'm in real life in a conversation, there's no predicting where that's going to go. It's going to be very context dependent. But when I have like this whole corpus of like presentations or whatever that I can just pull from on the spot as like this like reusable like talking points or whatever, like a toolkit of like reusable talking points, and like analogously to like UI development, I feel like that could go a long way. But yeah, that one story I mentioned, that was when I was a kid. And yeah, moving forward, how should I do this going forward? Especially because I'm going to be a little impatient. I don't necessarily want to wait for like when some companies are doing like public events. I just want to get things going right here, right now. So yes, how should I proceed? I don't know. It's a good question. But I don't know. It could make for some interesting stories down the road, especially if it's just completely terrible and they call security. They're like, and then drag me out. There's a life about creating about life experience or whatever. Oh yeah, one thing I really want to emphasize: this is a native app, and just let's see if I can break this down. There's a minimum width constraint. And why is it active here? Let's go to greetings and farewells. Okay, how can I swear I did this last night. Why is that not popping up? Ooh, that might be a bug. At any rate, it's popping up as a sheet. Now, why is this having issues? I turned on iCloud synchronization to synchronize it between devices, but it turns out it's actually kind of a hard problem. Then I turned it off, but I don't think it's fully turned off. So, yeah, I'm just going to strip out that. Everything's just going to be local to the device. Yeah. And my fans are spiking up. So whatever's going on, I'm just going to terminate it. Actually, hang on, I do want to mention this. Not too many people are aware of it, but let's see. This is the main scene. It should be window resizability, minimum content size. This really needs to be alphabetically sorted. Ah, perfect. Okay. Look at this. Popover. Like, it's basically its own, like, transient window, but unconstrained to the parent window frame in the larger desktop context. Isn't that amazing? Like, this whole idea of, like, being unconstrained by the rectangular frame of the parent window. Yeah, and not only that, when it comes to popovers, so the UI, in my case, not that great, but in general, like, you can have beautiful popovers with the little arrow actually pointing to the word you selected. Compared to most apps, especially non-native apps, it's just like this rectangular, maybe it's rounded window that's just like somewhere nearby what you clicked on, but there's never like what's that arrow called technically, like an anchor point relative to like what you clicked on. It's just these little small things that I really enjoy. It's the same with programming languages. As I mentioned, I used to consider myself an amateur compiler engineer, and how I got into that was really from Haskell. When I was a lot younger, like there's this one place I briefly interned, Python, then another job like also Python when I was older. And then maybe if I were to consider like a job in between those two is like also Python. Then like I was technically a grader too, so I've done a lot of small things. It's always Python for some reason, and like I even had an instructor reach out, and she was like, "Yeah, your Python code is beautiful." I really wish I saved that conversation history, so I could like, I don't know, just because like, but yeah. Anyway, I was kind of surprised because it was Python code. Python is Python. And not only that, like people are like, oh, it's indentation. Yeah, they know nothing. There's a good way to do indentation. There's a bad way to do indentation. So many things that they're just not really that thought out, especially in like languages like Python. It's really not like compared to like Haskell. Now you get the good, but you unfortunately also get the bad. PureScript improved a lot of things with regard to the bad of Haskell. But then you get the bad of PureScript, which is like small community, bad dev tools. So yeah, it's all terrible all around. But yeah, that's the thing with like Haskell too. There's two fundamental aspects when it comes to like data. You have data that's really like a product of things like C structs, tuples, records, whatever. It's basically just like multiple data types. Sometimes that could be like as like a set of like fields and values. Other times it might be just a tuple, which is like it's a term like a heterogeneous collection of values or types or whatever. But then you have cases where data varies in some way, such as especially when you're like compiler work, you're dealing with like trees essentially. And trees, what are they? Multiple different variants, like one for blocks or essentially stuff that can branch, whereas the leaf may be a separate type. You can encode that via like two branches that can implicitly be like nullable to represent if it's a branch or like the leafmost or bottommost leaf or whatever, terminal leaf, whatever you call it. But yeah, some types are great. And then in conjunction with pattern matching, which is a more uniform way of branching in programming. Most people are familiar with like branching based on Boolean conditions. But typically, you may also want to branch based on the values themselves, which could itself be like Boolean states like true, false, or even more semantic states like on or off, or variants that themselves have subdata, and you may want to pattern match on it in such a way as like if it has this structure or that structure. Pattern matching, great feature. In general, I want like all programming languages people are familiar with, especially mainstream ones, they all contain product types. Very few contain variant types or some. I refer to as some types because there's like product types and there's like some types. And when you have that, you really need a notion of pattern matching, which is a more uniform notion of branching. And this isn't a hard thing, but it is surprisingly not that common in programming languages, especially newer programming languages. And if there's one thing that drives me crazy, Google should just not be allowed to make programming languages. Whenever they do it, it's always terrible. I'm almost getting angry. Like, what's that? Like cortisol levels are rising because of how bad and just, oh man, that drives me crazy. Oh, that's just so dumb. All right, yeah, I gotta not show my crazy side. But I used to get really passionate on like programming language design. And it's just like, why do they do this? I don't know. They're stupid or something. But I'm gonna have to go back on the video feed. I'm gonna have to clip it out. But yeah. Anyway, it's just frustrating because sometimes you can be forced to use it, and it's like, why do they do this? I don't know. One thing I do like about Python area, they have this philosophy where it's like the guy who's in charge. They refer to him as the like benevolent dictator for life. And yeah, I just feel like I should be a benevolent dictator for life with regard to all program languages that are used in industry. And yeah, it's like if you go against my will, yeah, to the chopping blocks or something. But yeah, anyway, moving on. Why was I even talking about programming languages to begin with? I don't know. But yeah, moving on. Also, like, if I were to teach, never mind. Okay. Where am I? This is really dragging on. I am now at almost an hour, 40 minutes. And I don't know, I really just want to flesh out various things I may also want to talk about. But yeah, I thought I would end each video discussing a bit of philosophy. Yesterday I did the Zhuangzi. I almost feel like I want to do Cook Ding. Was that his name? Cook Ding? It's Cook something. At least I like to refer to it as just the butcher or whatever. Even though it's kind of like a negative connotation, but it was just like that was his profession, so he just processed meat. I don't think I have a screenshot, but it's basically, I don't know how to explain it. Yeah, anyway, I think that will be sufficient for today. And yeah, this is Colbin Wadman, and I am signing out.